Your child explodes, resists, cries, throws a tantrum just because of one word. No. My child was like that too. There was a time when I truly believed that, if my child had tantrums, it meant I wasn't being strict enough. So I tried reminding more, being firmer, raising my voice, even punishing. Eventually, my child became quiet, but only for that moment. The next time, everything repeated itself, again and again. And I was exhausted, until I realized something that completely changed the way I see tantrums. Many so-called behavior problems are actually unmet needs. That's when I began learning about how Finnish parents raise their children. Finland has been ranked the happiest country in the world for many years in a row. And what surprised me most was this: the foundation of that happiness doesn't begin in adulthood. It begins with children who grow up without needing punishment to learn how to behave. Finnish parents don't use timeouts. They don't rely on reward charts. They don't punish bad behavior. And yet, they raise children who are calm, confident, cooperative, and able to regulate their emotions without being yelled at into obedience. Today, I want to share with you 7 key principles of Finnish parenting, not for you to copy, but to help us rethink how we understand children's behavior and how tantrums can be softened before they even begin. Principle number 1. It's so simple, you may wonder why no one ever told you this before. Outdoor play every day. In any weather. What I learned is this: before asking my child to calm down, my child needs to move. There was a time when I expected my child to sit still, even though their entire day barely included any real movement at all. In Finland, children go outside every single day, not to burn off energy, but because they deeply understand what science has been showing us for years. Regular outdoor play reduces behavioral issues and improves emotional regulation in children. When children move their bodies and connect with nature, the excess energy, the kind that often turns into irritability and tantrums, is released naturally. Their bodies soften, stress hormones decrease, and their emotional state becomes more stable. When I started taking my child outside more, walking, free play, touching nature, I noticed the meltdowns were no longer coming one after another. Not because my child suddenly became better behaved, but because their nervous system finally had room to breathe. Children aren't hard to raise when they get enough movement. They struggle to regulate only when their bodies and brains have been compressed for too long. Principle number 2. What I learned is this: children need play before they are pushed to learn. I used to worry a lot. If my child didn't start learning early, would they fall behind other children? But in Finland, children don't enter formal education until around the age of 7. Before that, most of their time is spent playing, exploring, and developing social connections. At first, this was hard for me to believe, but then I began to understand why. Research shows that early academic pressure increases stress, anxiety, and oppositional behaviors in young children. When children are pushed to read, write, and memorize too early, their brains don't learn better. They shift into a state of defense. When I stopped pushing my child to study and allowed more free play, more curiosity, more learning at their own pace, I noticed my child became more cooperative, not because they were afraid, but because they no longer felt pressured every single day. Developmental science describes this as something fundamental. Free play builds the foundation for focus, learning ability, and emotional regulation later in life. And that's when I truly understood: my child doesn't need to learn early to succeed. My child needs to feel safe, curious, and genuinely interested first. And then I realized something else. Even when a child is given enough play and allowed to learn at their own pace, the way I respond to them every day is quietly shaping their confidence. Principle number 3. What I learned is this: praise less, but acknowledge more deeply. I used to praise my child all the time. Good job. You did great. I truly believed I was building my child's confidence, but little by little, I noticed something that stopped me in my tracks. My child began to fear making mistakes. They looked at me before trying something new. They waited for my reaction before trusting themselves. Psychological research shows that excessive praise can make children dependent on external validation and weaken intrinsic motivation. When I began to change the way I spoke, no longer rushing to praise outcomes, but paying attention to effort and process, instead, I started saying, "I see how long you worked on this. This was hard, and you didn't give up." And something surprising happened. My child became calmer in moments of failure. They were willing to try again, and they no longer needed constant applause from me. Science describes this as the difference between being praised to please others and being acknowledged in a way that builds self-trust. That's when I understood something deeply important. True confidence doesn't come from applause. It comes from the quiet inner belief, I can try, I can make mistakes, and I'm still okay. And then I realized something else. It wasn't only how I praised my child that shaped them. The way I set boundaries and the way I spoke to my child was quietly teaching them what they were worth. Principle number 4. What I learned is this: children need respect, not control. There were moments when my child didn't listen, and I would say, "Because I said so. You don't need to ask so many questions." I thought I was teaching discipline. What I didn't realize was this: my child wasn't learning how to cooperate. They were learning how to push back or how to shut down. In Finland, children are treated as human beings with emotions and a voice, not to make every decision, but to be heard and respected. Boundaries still exist, but those boundaries are explained, not imposed. Developmental psychology shows that when children feel respected and listened to, their brains are less likely to go into a defensive state, and cooperation comes more naturally. When I began changing the way I spoke to my child, explaining the reason behind limits, listening to their feelings before setting boundaries, I noticed that power struggles almost disappeared. Not because I gave in, but because my child no longer needed to fight me in order to be themselves. Science calls this approach warm, responsive parenting with clear boundaries, and that's when I understood something essential. Discipline doesn't begin with control. It begins with a safe, trusting relationship. Principle number 5. What I learned is this: boredom is not the enemy. I used to feel uneasy whenever my child said, "I'm bored." My mind immediately jumped to, I need to do something. I should play with them. I should come up with an activity. But in Finland, parents don't rush to fill every empty moment of a child's day. They allow their children to be bored. At first, that made me anxious. But then I began to understand why. Research shows that boredom activates creativity, problem-solving skills, and the ability to regulate emotions. When children aren't constantly entertained, their brains are gently forced to ask, "What can I do now?" And from that question, imagination begins to grow. When I stopped rushing to rescue my child from boredom, I noticed something shift. My child started inventing their own games, exploring their inner world, and relying on me less and less. Not because I abandoned my child, but because I trusted this truth. My child has the capacity to be with themselves. And I realized something deeply important. Children don't need to be busy all day in order to grow up emotionally stable. Sometimes it's in those quiet, unfilled spaces that a child learns how to listen to themselves. Principle number 6. What I learned is this: rest is not a reward, it's a need. I used to think that as long as my child slept enough, everything would be fine. But in Finland, rest is more than nighttime sleep. It's a slower rhythm of life. It's quiet moments during the day. It's evenings that aren't packed, with endless schedules and activities. Finnish parents protect bedtime, quiet time, and evening routines as non-negotiable. And science explains this very clearly. When children are overtired or overstimulated, the brain loses its ability to regulate emotions. In other words, an exhausted child cannot behave properly, no matter how much they want to. When I began to slow our days down, protect my child's sleep, and allow time simply to rest, to breathe, to do nothing, I noticed my child became more at ease, less irritable, and emotional outbursts grew farther apart, not because I suddenly became a better parent, but because my child's nervous system finally had a chance to recover. That's when I understood something essential. Rest is what my child needs in order to stay calm, to cooperate, and to truly be themselves. And after everything I had learned, movement, play, language, boundaries, boredom, and rest, I realized there was still one final principle, the most important one of all, and one I had misunderstood for a very long time. How I show up for my child when big emotions appear. Principle number 7. What I learned is this: emotions don't need to be punished. They need to be guided. In the past, when my child cried loudly, became angry, or completely fell apart, my first instinct was to say, "You need to calm down, go somewhere else until you stop crying. Don't cry anymore." I believed I was teaching my child how to control their emotions. But then I understood something deeply important. My child didn't need to be pushed away when they were at their most overwhelmed. They needed an adult to stay. In Finland, when children experience big emotions, parents don't punish those emotions. They don't send the child away to calm down alone. They stay with the child. They regulate themselves first, and they allow the child to borrow that calm. Neuroscience calls this co-regulation. A child's brain is not yet developed enough to self-regulate under stress. They need a calm, steady adult to learn how to do this. When I stopped trying to shut down my child's emotions and began to stay, listening, naming feelings, and holding boundaries with gentleness, the emotional storms became far less frightening, not because my child stopped having emotions, but because they no longer had to fight them alone. And that's when I understood the most important lesson of my motherhood journey. Children don't need to be fixed when emotions rise. They need to be guided in safety so they can slowly learn how to stand steady from within. And if you're still listening right now, you might be thinking to yourself, "This all makes sense, but how am I supposed to change everything at once?" I want you to know something important. You don't have to do everything right now. Finnish parents don't raise children through perfection either. They begin with very small changes, repeated gently, every day. So if you'd like, choose just one principle to focus on this week. Maybe it's taking your child outside for an extra 20 to 30 minutes each day. Maybe it's replacing "good job" with a sentence that recognizes effort. Maybe it's protecting your child's sleep more intentionally. Or maybe it's simply staying with your child when big emotions show up, instead of asking them to calm down right away. Not so your child listens faster, but so your child can learn something much deeper. My emotions are safe, and I don't have to face them alone. I truly believe that when we raise children with respect, understanding, and gentle boundaries, we're not just helping our own children today. We are planting something meaningful for the children who will grow up tomorrow, children who know how to listen to themselves, respect others, and stand strong without needing to hurt anyone along the way. If you've tried any of these approaches, or if you have your own experiences with calmer, more connected parenting, I would love to hear your story. Please leave a comment and share what's been working for your family. And if you found this video helpful, don't forget to like and subscribe to Mindful Parenting for more science-based parenting insights that truly work in real life. Gentle moments today build strong children for tomorrow. See you next time.